This is Rough Drafts Welcome,
the podcast where you can mess up, and we can too.
I'm Sachiko.
And I'm Erin.
And together with the editors at Salt and Sage Books,
we're changing the face of storytelling, one rough draft at a time.
We're glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Rough Drafts Welcome. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you today to Rebecca, who is one of my very favorite people in the entire world, and also a really, truly incredible editor here at Salt and Sage Books. Rebecca, hello.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come. I'm just so tickled to introduce everybody to you, and none of you get to have her as a best person. She's my best person. You don't get to keep her, but you can borrow her for your books because she really, genuinely, oh, you're such a good editor. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
We can spend this entire episode with just me gushing. So let's maybe not do that. So we'll start. Hi, who are you? What do you do? What do you love? Tell us about you.
I start when I go in, who am I? But no. Hello, Les Mis. I have theater kids, obviously. So I am, this is kind of fun. I didn't even think about this.
You are a master.
I am a master. Yes, I just graduated with my MFA in writing with an emphasis for children and young adults. And that has been really, really fun because one of the reasons why I wanted to study writing for children and young adults is because children's brains are different than adult brains. And I wanted to learn more about what children are looking for in reading, why the different things they experience at those ages, and how we do that through writing. So I felt like that would give me a broader base and understanding, because I also write for both children and adults. Let's see. Right now I am living in Utah. Been here since 2015. We are planning to move out, probably back to the, East Coast somewhere where we're mostly from in a few years. What else? I'm disabled and I do advocacy. That was something that I focused on in school. And I'm autistic and I have ADHD. So I do a lot of sensitivity reading in those kinds of areas. Yeah.
You're the coolest.
What else to say?
You're the coolest. Okay, tell us something that you just love. Like, what is a thing that when you see it, it just makes your whole body light up with happy shivers?
Like in reading or general?
You pick. Whatever. Anything at all.
Well, so I get really giddy lately about, I kind of revolve in my interests. And so lately I've been super, super interested in like vintage and antique things. Like I get really excited looking at the history of things. And for me, that all ties in kind of with books and the study of people and how we communicate, because looking at pieces of the past helps me to understand more about those people and what they did and how they lived. And so I like to go treasure hunting, like at thrift stores. And sometimes I'll, find something really cool and then wonder about the people who might have used it at that time.
I got lucky enough. I got lucky enough to go thrifting with you when we were at the same writing conference, and you helped me find some of my very favorite pieces that I guess I've changed my background so you can't see them, but they are prominently displayed up on my shelf that you can't see. I have them.
That makes me so happy. And let's see, I have one. Oh, this is cool. Let me show you. If I can put it on. I'm looking at my background. I love this background. It's not my house. Someday maybe my house will be that organized. But this, I don't know if you can see this little shoe.
Yes.
This is, I want to say, I could be wrong. This is 1940s. I think it's Fenton. And so beautiful. I found this in a bag of stuff at the thrift store. It's got a little chip, but I'm like, that's okay. I still love it. We have chips. We're still worthy, right? This has the little, they made these shoes at different times for different eras. And I have a milk glass version that's white. This is an amber one. And they are little cute relics from the past. And I think this one they made around the 1940s, I want to say.
That's beautiful.
So, yeah. So I think about, okay, maybe somebody back then had one of these little shoes on the vanity, and watched the old movies. Oh, sorry, if you hear the buzzing, it's my insulin pump that is alerting me, but it's good.
Okay. If you need to pause, you just say the word.
I will.
Okay. Alrighty. Tell me a little bit about you as an editor, particularly what do you really love to edit?
That is a good question. So I do different kinds of editing. Probably my favorite is developmental. And if we're talking about genres, I like to do a lot of, I love books with rich characterizations. Books that make me feel like the character is real. And really, I love most genres. The only things that I don't tend to enjoy editing would be like graphic slasher horror type of things, just because that really just, it just bothers me. And sometimes I can't get those images out of my head. And there are a lot of good editors out there who can kind of separate from that, but I struggle with doing that. And I don't tend to do, I'm okay with erotica that has consensual non-consent or things like that. But if it's very dark erotica that doesn't include consent, that's something that I don't really enjoy, and I choose not to do because for the similar reasons. But things that I love to do, goodness, anything that's kind of offbeat and quirky. I really love fun rom-com type of books. I love creative science fiction, fantasy, and especially children's literature. I really, really like contemporary fantasy in Kidlit. A lot of real world, maybe there's an aspect of magic, urban fantasy, that kind of thing. So those are probably the things that get me the most excited, but really anything that has a good character arc and I can really feel like I want to be friends with the character or I really care about what happens to them. So
I think it's so interesting as we've interviewed several of the different editors, how some of our editors have really clear, this is the genre that I really love. And other people have more, this is the type of thing, this is the feeling that I like editing. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it for me is because I read so very widely. I love to read all kinds of things. I read fiction, I read nonfiction. Some of my favorite books are autobiographies or biography type books, but they read like a story because they're just so fascinating, and it's all about pulling me in. Anything that can really pull me in, I enjoy it.
Biographies. I've only recently started to actually read biographies and be like, whoa! I feel like it's a genre that I was previously unaware of as engaging.
Mm-hmm.
But a well-written biography is you can't put it down. They're so good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they have that whole story arc to them too, or they focus on something specific. Probably, one of my very, very favorite books right now is Lessons in Chemistry. And that's an adult, I think it's more of a women's fiction, but the main character does have a lot of coding as being neurodivergent or autistic. And I don't know, just the way it's put together and how intelligent it is. And it's just one of my very, very favorite books. So if I could work on something like that, that would be incredible.
I love it. So you mentioned that you do sensitivity reading. What other services do you provide through Salt and Sage? And then you can also, if you have other ones that you do privately, you're welcome to share those as well.
Okay. Well, so through Salt and Sage, I'm mostly focusing on developmental editing for, all of those genres, multiple genres. I do also do proofreading and copy editing. Right now, I mostly do those two things for Penguin Random House. But I will consider doing them. I just, because of the amount of time I have, a lot of the projects that I take on, I'm kind of the very last stop before they're published. So I have a little bit, I can kind of slot those projects in where maybe they won't take a lot of extra time, and they go quicker if they're right before publication. So I'd be open to doing some more of those. Let's see. What else do? I do sensitivity reading. I actually am focusing a little bit more on developmental editing now than sensitivity reading. Um, let's see. What else? I have also I teach at writing conferences, so I'm available for those, or also for people who don't live close by. I can do Zoom workshops and things like that. So I've done one of the workshops that I've offered before is on deep point of view. I have a toolbox that I use for that, and that's been really fun.
I feel like I got to see you teach that one, and it was so good. It was so good.
Thank you. It was fun. I really, really enjoyed that. And then I've done it as an intensive too at a conference. So
that would be a really good intensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
it was fun getting to kind of see. That's one of my favorite things is teaching. So I'm kind of moving into that a little bit more, which is not something I offer yet through Salt and Sage, but someone can contact me if they're interested in that sort of thing.
Yes. So I'm curious, when you think about, back up. For me, copy editing, proofreading, those are more of a technical approach. Mm-hmm. And for me, I don't end up putting quite as much of myself as the editor into those. Like, my personality doesn't necessarily shine through in the same way, like as an editor, versus when I do a developmental edit. So right. I'm curious how you might describe, like, how do you move through a developmental edit?
That is a good question.
Thank you. I came up with it myself.
I'm so lucky. You always know what good questions to ask. So how I approach it is different depending on the writer. And I feel like that's important for me to know kind of what space a person is in as a writer. If you are a beginning writer, which we're all beginning writers at one point, when I remember thinking back to when I was a beginning writer and I wanted to fix all of the things, I also was very nervous about feedback and if somebody was going to, give me good feedback and not just tell me things were good. But I also was really nervous about them telling me what needed to be done. And so I think it's important for an editor to always, at least for me, to always approach feedback constructively. Like there are always good things to point out. And something that I've been focusing a lot on lately when I talk about how good somebody is at something. Okay, let me see if I can phrase this in a way that makes sense. This is why I write, because thinking takes a minute. So a lot of times when I see an artist do something, whether it's a musician or a painter or somebody, and they say, oh, that person is so talented. That bothered me for a really long time. And then I realized why that was. And it's because there are a lot of people that have some modicum of talent in what they're doing. But in order to really master something, they need to become skilled. So what I do is now I've changed that phrasing from, oh, that person is so talented, to, wow, that person is so skilled. Because a very tiny percentage of people are just prodigies right off the bat. And even those people have teachers who help them to refine and build their skill. And so, I think talent can play a part in what we have aptitude for and how far we might want to go with something, our passion for it. But I feel like it's that practice that really develops our skill. So many times when I see a manuscript from a new writer, there's always talent in there. And that they're natural. I feel like it's just as important to point out what things that you naturally have aptitude for, as well as the things that we need to work on, because everybody's going to have both of those things. And hearing the things that we are naturally have aptitude for, that we maybe have a knack for, are going to help us know where we can build that might be a little bit easier for us. And it also feels good to know that we can get something right. And then those things that we need to work on, that gives us kind of a base where I can say, okay, like your character's dialogue here feels very realistic. And here are some extra skills you might think about developing as you go further into dialogue. Something that I had to do was that was actually an area that I just kind of naturally gravitated toward. And then I realized when I'd be having a great conversation with my characters, but my partner would read something for me, and he'd say, this is great, but where are they?"
It's the floating heads.
It's the floating heads.
I have this same problem in my drafts. Same problem.
And let's see, I've written, I think, 7 full books and then parts of a lot of other books. And it's something that I still go through and do an edit specifically to look to see, do I have enough setting in here? And those are skills that we develop as we move on. Now, for somebody who is maybe a more experienced writer, and also those basic skills, like I won't list out everything top to bottom that might need to be fixed, because I like to edit in layers. And someone who's a new writer, maybe there are some big picture things, and it wouldn't make sense for me to say, okay, we're going to take this on a line by line level if, maybe some big portions of the story might need to be moved around. So I don't want to hand a new writer a ton of extra work until they are satisfied with kind of that basic level of what they're doing.
Right. But you get the shape of the thing first.
Exactly. Which is why it's really great if you can get readers or other writers to kind of help you with some of those things before hiring an editor, because I can help you. The more you've done that, the more I can help. But I also like to say that the best thing you can do for your first book is to write a second one, because we learn so much by subsequent doing. And then we can take the things we've learned from that second book and go back to the first one. For writers who are more experienced, I will tend to, a lot of times there's not very many big picture adjustments. So I will generally pick some skills that I think would really level up and ramp up their writing. And I'll also, that's part of the process, when they send their manuscript, if there's anything that they kind of get a feeling, trust those feelings. Like, that's something I learned in school, was that I could trust my intuition when I kind of like, I wonder about this. And I'd send it off, and my advisor would come back with a letter saying, here's what I think we should, you maybe should consider here. And generally, most of the time, it was stuff that I'd kind of had an inkling about, but didn't trust myself on. So yeah, if you've been writing for a while, I feel like that's something you can do, is kind of trust yourself and write that in. If you're going to send it to me and say, hey, I'm kind of wondering about this aspect of my writing, and I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
I think that is such an underutilized tool, that so many people, when they come and they get their edits, I mean, whether it's their first edit or their 500th edit, so many people don't tell you what they're actually looking for. And goodness, I wish more people would, because that doesn't mean that your editor isn't going to look at everything else. But you are going to be able to enter into a dialogue that is actually going to be addressing your primary concerns.
Mm-hmm. And this is one of my favorite things to do about editing. There was a client I had for quite a while who, it was awesome for me as an editor, because we worked on various skills and we had a dialogue. And then through the way that their books evolved, and they wrote for adults and for kids, I would highlight certain aspects, and then I like to teach in my edit letters, and I will use examples because that's how I learn. And we would focus on certain aspects that I would see kind of repeated more often in the manuscript. And then they would work on them and then their next book, I would see a lot more of that thing in their next book. So that was really fun. And yeah, I mean, when I go through, I will make a list of micro issues to macro issues, big ones, to micro issues, what I see as smaller ones. And an editor is not maybe going to get every single thing in a book because everybody has the things that they kind of focus on. But the more that you can kind of refine your style and what you want, what you kind of are looking for, that helps to know where you'd rather have more emphasis, if that makes sense.
Oh, does it ever? I think that I feel like we could talk about this forever, but I want to be conscious of time. Okay, I know you said you're primarily focusing on developmental editing right now. I know you did a lot of sensitivity reading, especially in the beginning of Salt and Sage, and I'm curious to pick your brain about that a little bit, your sensitivity reading knowledge. So what do you specifically read for, and what are you just so over? What do you wish we could can we please just retire this trope already? The stage for ranting is yours, please.
Oh, yes, we do not have enough time for for all of that. So probably, all right. So two things. No, I've sensitivity read for multiple things. I have experience for religious deconstruction and disability and certain specific illnesses and mental health issues like anxiety, depression, autism, ADHD, chronic illness, invisible illness, being a parent, being an autistic parent, as well as having autistic children, because that's a different kind of situation as well. So a lot of those kinds of things. But if I could just hand over my critical thesis, probably my biggest, if I could just distill it down, my biggest pet peeve is, okay, how do I put this? Let me think. So the example I used, so thinking about disability, disability is basically has been portrayed under two different models. Takes a while to get into all of it and how that works. But essentially, there is the medical model of disability and the social model of disability. And I would encourage anyone watching this, if they want to know more about it, to do some research on this. There is one of my very, very favorite books, and I don't have it up here. I'd show you. Is called Sitting Pretty by Dr. Rebecca Taussig. She is an educator and a wheelchair user. And it is a fabulous discussion on the social model of disability and how we can evolve as a society. So essentially, the medical model of disability is the one that the healthcare profession embraces, where we look at a person as a problem to solve, and we kind of place the responsibility for disability on the individual. Now, there are reasons for that. It's not all bad. I mean, if you go to a doctor, you're going to want them to help. Their job is to help you. Thank you. Yes, Erin folded up. Thank you. If you go to a doctor, you're going to want them to help you to improve your quality of life. And that's something that they do. Where that becomes an issue is where society also puts that on the responsibility of an individual. So Taussig in her book uses the example of a woman in a wheelchair sitting in front of a building that has a flight of stairs. And so the medical model would basically look at that woman and say, okay, so how can we get her into the building? Should we build get a ramp? Should she go around on the other side to look for another entrance? Is there anything that we could do to give her legs more accessibility, like some kind of other kind of device or that sort of thing? And this is very nutshell right here, very, very much in a nutshell, but the social model of disability would move that burden off of her to get into the building to the building itself. How have we designed this building? Is it more accessible? How can we make it more accessible for every person? And probably one of my favorite examples of this is the history of the curb cut, that space, sidewalks where you can, roll anything up onto the sidewalk. They were not common before World War II. There was a man in, I forget, Minnesota, I think, who came back from the war, and he was a wheelchair user, and he realized soon that there were a lot of opportunities disabled people could not get in his town because they couldn't even get up on the curb. And so he, I think he became a lawyer and he fought for curb cuts to be installed. But then it was, I want to say, like 14, 16 years later before it actually became a national thing. And it wasn't until a group of students it's one of the California schools. My memory does not work so well, but there was a disabled student in a wheelchair user, and he had issues with getting into the school, and they couldn't get anybody to change things. So now I'm not advocating this legally. I cannot advocate this, but he and a group of people went out at night, and they brought asphalt, and they smashed curbs, and they made curb cuts. And it was not long after that they became common throughout the nation, and the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. I get shaky, like I get kind of cold, like when I get a little bit like excited, but also like passionate about something. So I'm going to grab my blanket here.
Yeah, please
We're going to
do.
have self-care right here, right now.
Yay. It feels really frustrating to me to think about all of the people who were wheelchair users before that moment, who would probably asked and deserved that amount of support and accommodation as well, but it just didn't. We were just okay with it, I guess.
It was. And the cool thing, though, and why I love this example, is because curb cuts did not only benefit disabled people. People were able to push strollers up onto curbs easier. They were able to use like food carts and get them around much easier. And so it kind of shows a social model of disability. It benefits everybody. So when we transfer that to writing, so often we want to write about what I call issue books, where the person's disability is the issue that they need to overcome. And while that is an important aspect of education, there is so much more that we can do to show disabled people as full members of society who have other aspects to them, who are living with their disability, but they are also contributing to society. And I have there are some fantastic books that do this. I actually, for my CTI, interviewed Dr. Carlos Hernandez. He's the author of the Sal and Gabby books. And so good.
I love those books so much.
They are incredible. And he did, I had such a good interview with him, and he does not have type 1 or diabetes at all, but he wrote Sal having diabetes, but it's a science fiction book about a boy who is trying to fix cracks in the universe. And Sal having diabetes was just part of his story. So it wasn't the main focus. That is probably my biggest pet peeve, is when disabled people are reduced to only the conditions they have, or showing that their existence is spent only fighting those things or overcoming those things, and not being accepted for the full, rounded individuals they are and supported. Because people right now are suffering a whole lot because they are not allowed. Our government in the United States has built supports in such a way that a disabled person can only make up to a certain amount of money, and very, very little, or have any assets, and still be able to get the medical help they need. Otherwise, they're cut off. And the gap is just tremendous. So we have so far to go. And I feel like literature is one way that we reflect what a society values, and we can educate and help people learn by appropriate representation in all the ways. But disability is obviously a passion of mine.
Well, it's important. I follow someone on TikTok named Imani, and I will tell you her username if I can think about it. Crutches and Spice, I believe. Mm-hmm. And I was listening to her the other day, and she was talking about how she does not lean one way or the other on the political spectrum. What she does instead is she listens to people's policies towards disabled individuals. And she says, you would be surprised how much you'd think one party might be better at it than the other, but their policies end up being essentially the same. And that so much of the political machine in the United States, the culture that we live in, really sees disability as a thing to either be ignored or a thing to be ashamed of. Like, it feels like it's one of the two. But if you are out there publicly saying, no, I should not be ignored and I should not be required to, like I can't like magically fix my diabetes, for example. Like, that's not just going to poof and go away. And if you ignore it, it's going to get worse. But for people to exist with their disability publicly feels like a revolutionary act.
Yes.
And that bothers me so much. But it really does, though, because it flies so much in the face of capitalism as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is frustrating because for these people to do such work and educate us that way and then have to also live in the system, it takes a real toll. Now, I'm just starting to get more into advocacy now because my family, there's 6 of us. All of us have needs. All of us have disabilities in some way. And so that's been a lot of my life is focusing on that. And as I'm starting to move into other spaces, I'm seeing just how much work there is to do. When I decided to do this topic for my critical thesis, I knew that it would be difficult and that I would need to have self-care. My amazing, amazing mentor was Fran Wild. Incredible writer, incredible human. And I'll try not to get emotional when I talk about her because I could not have done my critical thesis without her. And it's work that I'm very grateful I did and that I'm proud of. But I did not know what a toll just the research alone would take. I read so many books, and great many of those books were celebrated by people who are not intimately acquainted with living a disabled life. A lot of them were lived adjacent or were parents or, know people who are. And there were so many things that I found that in those stories that were very painful to read. And I was in therapy at the time anyway. I was still going through a deconstruction from a very high demand patriarchal religion that I grew up in. So putting that on top of it and then having to read these things, write about them, and then manage my own conditions at the same time was about too much. And if I didn't have the support of my advisor, who kind of helped me to pull it together to get this published. And then I ended up doing my lecture on the very same thing. I don't know that I could have gotten that information out there. So I think it is so important to listen to these people who are putting this information out there because it takes so much just to do it in the first place.
I completely agree. I feel very similarly to what you just described towards sensitivity readers. When you receive a piece, especially one that has problematic underpinnings, it takes so much emotional effort to be able to articulate what the problem is, why it's a problem, and think about ways to move forward with that problem. And especially if you're not certain where the author is at.
Yes.
Yeah. It can be it is a difficult revolution to participate in on everywhere across the board.
And that's the same for every marginalized community. I can't speak to personal experience for a lot, but for listening to other sensitivity readers who talk about those things, it certainly seems to be a similar experience across the board. Yet we do these things because we know that people want to help and they have good intentions. And that has always been something that's been important to me. Is when I lectured about this, it was very important to me to tell people, hey, I know that you have a good reason for doing this. You want to represent people and you want to do it in a helpful way. And so I feel like this discussion is so critically important. How can we help writers to include representation in helpful ways? And it means so much to me when people take their work, or they take the idea of doing this, and they do research and they listen to people from those communities, and they're like, okay, I want to help, please help me to help in a way that is going to be helpful instead of hurtful. And that means a ton, because nobody sets out to write a book saying, I want this to hurt people. I mean, most people don't do that.
I would hope nobody does, but people surprise me every day.
Yeah, I would hope not either. But most people do have really, really good intentions. And there were a couple of times when I ran into that, and I really wished that the writer had and the writers only know what they know, right? A lot of publishers, that's really where publishers and agents, if they know that these things can be an issue, then they can kind of tell writers, hey, this might be a problem, instead of waiting until reading as the very last step before publication. Because I did run into a few times where I found some things that they really needed to consider before publication. And that ended up, it would have been much easier to address those things if they had done that earlier in the process.
Yep, absolutely. We don't have that happen a ton anymore. I feel like there has been that's not completely true. I feel like there has been a small shift. Mm-hmm. It's not big yet, but I feel like there's been a small shift to people understanding, authors, editors, agents, all of the above, being more aware of the best places to put a sensitivity read and the best places to receive that sort of impact from the community that the book is about. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad to see us shifting a little bit more towards like, okay, let's get it done sooner rather than later. Still doesn't happen like that every time, but I think we're seeing a small pivot in the right direction.
Which is so awesome, because that even, I mean, I had to pull back a lot while I was in school, so it's been a couple of years. But even in, in my work for Penguin, they've added to their style guide for editors as well, saying, hey, if you notice anything in here that could potentially be a sensitivity thing, please speak up and let us know. And so I'm very heartened by this, like all these little shifts that we're having is taking us into another direction. And I like the idea of comparing the whole shift to the journey with eyeglasses, because eyeglasses are a disability aid. They started off under the medical model, where people a lot of times would be made fun of. You'd have gotten better about this now, but I still see where they have like the teenage girl dressed for the prom, and they take off her glasses so that she can,
Heaven protect us. She can be beautiful with her glasses on, not get off.
Exactly. And then we've kind of moved through now, though, where I don't see people complaining about Superman, whether he's Clark Kent with his glasses or Superman. So
it's the biceps. You add biceps and suddenly people are like, oh, glasses are hot. Who knew?
Exactly. So we've kind of moved that way from the medical model kind of into the social model, where now people are, they use sunglasses. They use glasses for aesthetic purposes. We use them for glare as well, for like computers. It's moved into being fully accepted and helpful in all kinds of ways. And so the more we can do that with everything, I think, related to disability aids and lives in general, we're just going to help continue to benefit society as a whole.
I agree. And it can feel really easy as a writer to feel like, oh, well, my book is just one book. It's just one drop in the bucket. But what you were just explaining proves the point that teeny tiny changes, when taken together, shift everything. It changes the way that we see all of it. So the work that individual writers do is critically important. Even if the only person who ever reads your book is you have still changed the way that you understand things, and that has ripple effects.
Oh, absolutely. My first couple of books I wrote and published before I understood a lot of things that I learned from other people in the industry. So, going back to those now, I kind of cringe a little bit at some of the things that are in there, some of the things I didn't know, but we don't know what we don't know. And through the doing, we learn. So, yeah, I think that's so important.
Beautifully said. All right, we're going to wrap this up, and I'm just going to give you our rapid fire. They're not really rapid. Our final questions. Okay. What is your favorite book, which I know is a terrible question, but do you have an answer? What is your favorite book?
Well, okay. Two things. So I did mention Lessons in Chemistry, so that's my favorite adult book right now. Probably my favorite, I'm going to give you an author instead of just a singular book, but one of my, it's so hard to pin down. One of my favorite authors right now are Lauren DiStefano's Middle Grades, because they have this kind of fairy tale-esque, almost like that old-fashioned fairy tale quality, but she also writes such the depth of serious subjects and hard subjects in a way that's accessible for children.
That's so hard to walking that line is so tricky.
It is. Okay, one other came to mind, so I'm going to mention this one. It is a difficult book to read. It is one that I might not, it's a middle grade, and I might not, if you have a sensitive child, I would maybe read it before having that child read it. But it is called A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. Let me look that up real quick to make sure I've got her name right. Let's see.
I can look it up too. You want to race? We'll see who can get to it the fastest. A Kind of Spark.
A Kind of Spark. So Elle McNichol is an autistic author and advocate, and name is ELLEMCNICOLL. And she's Scottish, and she's autistic, and writes this book about an openly autistic girl. Mm-hmm. And the audiobook is really cool because it has the Scottish accent, and it is very fun to listen to. But it is an issue book and shows this girl's journey. She finds out from a teacher who is an abusive teacher. So content warning for that verbally abusive teacher, about the witches in her hometown hundreds of years before, who were accused, and she wants to create a memorial to them. She feels a kinship with them because people didn't understand them because they were different. And this book showcases both the medical model of disability in some ways and the social model in the way that she's supported by some of her family. She has an autistic older sister, and by people around her, and it approaches and challenges social stereotypes about autism, and does it in such a beautiful, deep way. But I would, like I said, if you have a sensitive child, I would read it first, because it could be.
That sounds amazing. Apparently they're making a TV show of it as well.
Oh, really?
Or maybe they did it in 2023. Read the book first. The book is always better.
Wow.
Maybe not always, but most of the time.
I had not heard of that. I'm going to have to look that up.
I'm going to have to take a peek at it. Okay. What is your favorite animal? Do you have one?
I have a couple. Okay. So
Lynx. I'm happy.
Lynx is probably my first one. I also like foxes a lot, and hedgehogs. Yeah.
They're so cute. All right. Digital or physical books?
So it used to be physical books, but now, because of my hands and my ability to hold books, mostly it's digital. Yeah. They're more accessible for me.
It's exactly it. I love digital books for the accessibility that is inherently built into them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I can read a lot at night. I love being able to switch the screen to the dark screen, so I don't wake up my partner if I can't sleep, and I can just read. Yeah.
But
I feel like
My son, like, he reads into the night, and I feel like he does not understand the difficulty of when I was a child of, like, trying to angle the light in just such a way that I could still see what was on the page, but my parents wouldn't know I was awake.
Although I have a story about that.
Do you? Would you like to share it?
Sure. So back when I was a kid, we had those alarm clocks that had the nightlight on the back, and we could slide the nightlight to how light or how dark it was. So we lived in a 100-year-old house, and we were at the top of the stairs. So you had to go through my sister's room to go to my parents' room. And I would take the alarm clock and put it in front of me, hold the book behind the light, and I would be reading until I'd hear her coming up the stairs, and then I'd quickly, I felt so guilty because I was like this child who tried to be perfect. So I felt so guilty that I would quickly throw the alarm clock, put the book underneath my covers and pretend I was asleep, and slowed my breathing and everything. And years later, my mother would swear up and down. She's like, "No, you were asleep." And I'm like, "No, I wasn't, Mom."
No, I wasn't. I did that exact same thing with, like, slowing down my breathing. Mine was that there was a street lamp outside of my bedroom window, and I learned that if I could, because we were in bunk beds too, so, like, my sister was on the bunk under me, so I really didn't want to wake her up. So there was, like, a certain angle that I could hit with the blinds where the light would, like, come in and I'd have to hold my book, like, up kind of weird so that I could sit it, but I would read like that. And then I'd hear my parents come and be like, like, I listen, how's my sister breathing? And I totally just copy her breathing. I got caught more than once, but oh well. And I don't care that's actually been one of the things that, like, I have really healed my own inner child about, because when my son is reading into the night, I go in and I'm like, it's late. Go to sleep. But he's not in trouble for reading, because reading is magical. And why would you ever want to punish somebody for reading? Mom and Dad, why would you do that? Anyway, before this devolves into trauma talk. Okay, our very last question is, what is one thing that you want all of the listening writers to know?
So I actually thought about this one a little bit. So something that when I started grad school, I had felt like I had lost some of my writing voice, and I lost some of that joy. And I was trying to figure out and find it again. And as part of that program, I read hundreds of books over those 2 years. And I would admire so many aspects of other people's voice. And then I'd go back and work on my own stuff. And I'd kind of feel like, it's just not as good. Like, I just admired what these other people did. It was in my second semester, and I had Will Alexander for my advisor. And we focused, he's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I just adore him and his books. Part of my focus that semester was on finding the joy, reigniting that spark. And so he encouraged a lot of play. And between that first and second semester, now the first semester, actually it's kind of a two-parter. I had Sheila Chari as my advisor, and she is incredible. And during that first semester, I also was where I had just started grad school. And then a few weeks later, I dove headlong, not on purpose, into my religious deconstruction, which I would spend a long time. I didn't have anybody else to talk to about it at that time, except like on Reddit. And so I would spend time just diving into the internet and trying to process, and then coming out of that and writing fiction and processing a lot of emotion through fiction. And there was one night when I had about 12 pages due, and I just could not get my brain to wrap around writing. And I had so much stress and anger about that time, what was happening in my life, and frustration is that when you're struggling with health things, you go through sometimes where you're doing okay, and other times where it just kind of all feels like it's falling in on you, as anybody does when you're going through something hard. And I just finally said, okay, I'm going to write some verses, do some novel in verse, because small verses fills up the page and it still counted. So I would just poured out my feelings and my anger and just wrote these verses, and it was rough and it was difficult, but it just flowed. And I just poured it all out and sent it in. And that was a turning point for me, because the feedback I got helped me to realize that when I put so much of myself into my writing, that it mattered and it counted and it reached people. And so we tend to devalue as writers what's important to us. A lot of times we tend to devalue our own emotions and our own experiences. But when we let those things come out, we can always shape them and work on them and help them. But that essence of who we are is important. And it's that sort of thing, is what we're used to experiencing doesn't always feel worthy because we're used to it. Somebody else's pain often feels more interesting than our own. And somebody else's joy often feels more interesting than our own, especially if we've grown up and had any kind of messaging that told us that other people mattered more than we do. But no one else can add to your own voice. And even though your experiences are different from anybody else's and are very unique to you, as humans, we all share similar emotions. So I can read a story about somebody else and different experiences than me, but it touches something inside me that I need because the emotions are similar. So I just want to this is kind of a longer answer, but whether it's pain or through finding joy, like when I let myself go in that second semester and I just wrote silly things and I wrote for fun and I let that joy come out, whatever that emotion was, if it was coming from a place of authenticity inside me, it reached other people. And I want every writer to know that that can only come from them and can't come from anyone else.
I am so glad we're recording this. I'm so glad we're recording this. That is so beautifully said. That is so beautifully said. Man, we could just use that as a springboard to go on for another hour, I feel like. Okay, I actually don't think I have anything that I could add to that. That was wonderful. You're perfect. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, if you guys want to hire Rebecca, I don't blame you. You can find her on the website. She is just as cool as an editor as she is, as you're seeing her here.
Oh, thank you.
You are one of the most authentic people I know. And the way that I have seen you interact with clients and the way that you interact with me and the way I've seen you interact with other editors and your students, you bring this sense of like meaning and like groundedness. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like when you look at something, it suddenly feels real. And I think your willingness to look at things that are hard and to gaze on them unrelentingly makes them exist more for those of us who are experiencing them. So,
oh, wow, that's beautiful. Thank you.
I think you're marvelous.
Well, I think you are too.
Well, you too.
Yeah, I love, that's probably my favorite thing about teaching is that everybody's voice matters. Yeah. It truly does. It's not just a soundbite. Like,
I agree. It's such, agreed. Okay, we have to wrap it up. We're way over time. Okay, thank you all so much for listening. You know where to find us, and we will see you next time. Bye.
This has been Rough Drafts Welcome.
Thank you so much for listening.
Got any questions? We would love to hear them. Got a complaint? We'll hear it too.
Yep. Leave us a 5-star review. pretty please, and thank you. And if you want to book with Salt and Sage Books or learn anything else about what we do, or if you want to work with us or take our courses or blah, 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 you can find us at www.saltandsagebooks.com. And we're all over social media too.
We sure are.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.